Hello and welcome to Into You, the podcast where I take the dive into getting to know you. My name is Adam Straughan, and today I am joined by somebody who is incredibly talented and really, really inspiring for the work that he does. He is a mental health advocate and is currently the head of organizational development at NHS Hampshire, Southampton, and Isle of Wight, and previously lead Freedom to Speak Up Guardian for the Solent NHS Trust. He has a history of working in the hospital and healthcare industry, from facilitating safe space sessions to presenting a documentary with a cast of ITV's Coronation Street regarding a storyline on subculture hate crime. Outside of his incredible work with the NHS and mental health, he is the frontman of metal band Bury Tomorrow, whose latest album, The Seventh Son, can be heard everywhere. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the podcast Mr. Daniel Winter Bates. How are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, very well. That was a lovely introduction on an afternoon, so I appreciate that. That's great.
No, you're welcome, man. Just writing your biography for you. So Dan, I don't know, you and I have actually met before. So you went on a tour. It was the Stage Invasion tour of 2017, and you played Liverpool, and I was at that gig. So there was a moment when, I don't know if you remember, we're thinking, God, like 2017, when was that? But you asked the crowd, but you were like, you know what, guys, you're so far away. Like, I wish you could just come on stage. And you asked everyone to jump on, and we all jumped on. So, like, I remember diving over the barrier just to get on. And then, we kind of just partied and just had a good time on stage for like the last couple of songs. And it was awesome, man. So it was cool to have that interaction.
Yeah, it is a while ago we did Stage Invasion. I always look back with real fond memories of that tour, just for that exact reason of just how intimate it was. And it was kind of weird, like it was really nostalgic because we were playing older, like a lot older songs in our back catalogue in venues that we'd been playing when we were kind of coming up, and when I was like 16 and 17. And some of the songs that I wrote when I was 17, I was playing again in the same venues, and it was just like I remember being like, this is a proper moment, going back in time, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. And speaking of moments, like, I have to ask you, man, like, how was Bloodstock open air?
Hot. Really,
Yeah.
really hot. And when we took Pyro, which was like the worst decision of our lives. That was cool. It was really nice to play like often we were at the staples like, Download or Slam Dunk or Reading and Leeds. The latter probably less so these days, but like it was nice to do a different festival that obviously has got a very cult following and it's a bit smaller in its nature as well, which was quite nice to do as well. But yeah, it was extremely hot. Probably the hottest festival we played that year.
And there's no shade. Like, I mean, on the stage there's kind of some shade, but then when you're out in the crowd, there was like some netting, but it was like camouflage nets. So there was just holes in it, so you just couldn't escape the sun. It was wild.
There's only one festival worse. That's Full Force Festival, and that's been like 40 degrees before a couple of times in Germany, and that is obscene. It's so hot that like people hide in the shade, so you often play sometimes like nobody in front of you, but if you're playing in the day, so it's a fun one.
Wild, like literally evaporating on stage. 40 degrees, man. And like you're very energetic as well on stage, so running around in that sun, man. Couldn't imagine it. Speaking of Bloodstock as well, like, there is that connection with obviously the Sophie Lancaster stages of Bloodstock. And I've been going to Bloodstock since like 2006. I remember like when that stage was first opened, obviously. And I want to kind of lean in and talk to you before we talk about obviously your music. I want to ask you more about, becoming a mental health advocate, because I think that's incredibly important and so fascinating, to be honest. So like, I know that, last year you did a post on World Mental Health Day, and you talked about, kind of your own struggles with anorexia, body dysmorphia, and obviously assault, and talking about the social media image of the body versus, the kind of the real body, as it were. And I just want to ask you about that, Dan. Can you just talk me into like your trajectory into kind of that focus on mental health for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, I think, and even, mental health practitioners and psychologists and stuff, in a lot within healthcare, you kind of go into it for a couple of reasons. One, you want to support people and do something kind of bigger than yourself. But equally, a lot of people will all have connections to healthcare needs, we all have that. And this is what the kind of work that I do within organizations is actually redefining that connection between community and being a patient and also being a staff member. It's kind of all encompassing. Everybody will have to access healthcare. And social care at some point in their life. And so for me, it was kind of like, I've worked in the NHS pretty much as long as I've been in the band. I joined the band when I was 16. I joined the NHS when I was 18.
Mm.
And have worked across like acute hospitals. For people that don't know what acute means, that's kind of been the big hospitals, and all where the inpatients go. And then I've also worked for community providers, which is often kind of community care. It's often Pan Hampshire style services, and then also things like mental health community care as well. And so I've had a fairly good career in that, of pushing 15 years in it, and like always compartmentalized my life. So it was always band and then work done, and they were two
Yeah.
very separate things. And then obviously I had my kind of journey with mental health when I was younger, as you made reference to. Obviously, I had an eating disorder when I was younger, and that doesn't, for me anyway, for some people they would probably disagree, but for me it never really goes away. I've just learned to manage it and understand it a little bit more, a bit more about acceptance, and
Mm.
but the thoughts and the triggers are still very similar. And I remember like looking back, and it's only when you really go through it, realizing that actually I probably did suffer with anxiety. Well, I definitely suffered with anxiety and low mood when I was younger as well. You made reference to being assaulted. I was assaulted when I was 15 years old for no reason other than the way I looked, which was really it was a fairly serious assault. I was punched with a weapon, which left me really a little bit perplexed as to a society. It was the first real time that had probably happened to me. I wasn't a person that got into fights or anything like that. And so it was pretty intense. And I didn't really deal with it, if I'm honest. I never went to kind of counselling. I was offered it, of course. My family is incredible when it comes to being a support network. So that probably didn't help me, because I was
Mm.
probably like, well, my family's great, so if I've got any issues, I'll talk to them. But actually, none of my family had necessarily been through that. And it was a very new thing for them as well. And quite a traumatic thing, I'm sure, for my family, my mum, my dad, my brother, kind of going through that process. So
Yeah.
I then like fast forward like up until when I was 26, and I'd been through like family loss and bereavement and stuff like that, and never really been affected by it. I've been sad, but like never shown emotion, never got upset about it. And I remember like when I look back, like we did like the architects tour, which was 2016, I believe it was. And
Mm.
I remember being like this is great, but I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't like I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't like I was sad about it or upset about it, but it was just like, yeah, cool, going through the emotions. And I almost had like a helicopter view of myself.
Mm.
And then I got engaged in 2018. And no, I didn't. I got engaged in 2016. Got married in 2018. And I just couldn't regulate my emotion. It was like, because I was super positive and it was amazing, and it was just, I just couldn't regulate. I had a great time. I was up here, and then literally within weeks, I plummeted. And a lot of people, when I say that, it's like, oh, cold feet and you were scared and all of that
Mm.
kind of stuff. But it wasn't really that. It was like it was just not understanding emotion, and I couldn't regulate it. And it completely pushed me into crisis. And I think I've probably been suffering with long-term depression for a long, long time. I've definitely been suffering with anxiety for a long, long time. And it just meant that I couldn't pull myself back out of it. Didn't know the tools and techniques. Probably have been around a lot of people that had it, but at that time, my working environment, it was so compartmentalized. So I was just really, really struggling, really, really bad. I was in crisis pretty much. And then I went and got diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and depression, amongst things like OCD, intrusive thoughts as well, which is something I do struggle with massively, the cyclical thought process of intrusive thoughts. And it just really opened my eyes, actually. And I think for me, when it comes to why did I get involved in advocacy, and one is to help myself, and not trying to sound selfish in that actually for me, my hobby ended up becoming my own well-being.
Mm.
And then I entered an organization which was much more focused on kind of lived experience and talking about lived experience. And so I ended up decompartmentalizing and starting to just be me, like for, even visible things. So I used to have no visible tattoos when I worked in this old environment. And then I moved and I started getting visible tattoos, and I started directing my work away from patients and actually more towards staff. And that was another kind of move that I did from that point. And I think it just helped me really start to become my own self, my whole self. And yeah, and as you made reference to, we've done lots and lots of tours, and then that kind of helped because and my platform in the band is the biggest platform I have.
Yeah.
And so, I've started weaving in some of that stuff, then fast forward into safe spaces and doing all of that, which I know we'll probably touch and make reference to at some point. But, that it's just really my job was just to try and connect the dots for other people,
Hmm.
and explain to people that it's that age old thing. It's okay not to be okay, and we should all talk about it. But actually, I felt like I needed to actually talk about it, and I needed to actually do stuff about it, not just send out a virtue signaling message to
Yeah.
everyone to say, aren't I great for talking about mental health, but more just actually having meaningful connections where I could equally learn as much from others as they could maybe learn from my journey.
Yeah, no, massively. I mean, first of all, I mean, congrats on like actually doing that, Dan. Because as you said, a lot of people talk about wouldn't it be great if that happened, but don't take the steps to do it. And that's sometimes the hardest thing. Like, to talk about my experience very briefly, but like as a queer person, sometimes, I grew up and it was hard holding on to something for so long. And a lot of the feelings that come with that, right? Obviously, we have very different experiences for what we've been through, but some kind of shared commonality between us is that holding on to things and not really processing things. And I guess the way I kind of summed it up for me, it was like it's almost as if there was like a stone rolling around in my mouth that I could never spit out. And it kind of like that's how it felt for me for so long. And everything that comes with that. And you talk about, like presentation of yourself with your tattoos and everything like that, and kind of living more of just who you are and having, the gumption to do that. And I think that's incredible. And one of the most important things is to speak about it. And as you referenced there with safe spaces, I think that's a fantastic idea. It reminds me of like, it's like a community of inquiry, like people coming together, sitting in a space and talking and doing the work. And I know that you touched on, you said that a lot of the statistics for kind of suicide rates are men's statistics are a lot higher. And it's because men tend not to talk about their feelings. It's the old stereotype we know, but it's true. It's nice that, in fact, it's not nice. It's fantastic that you've taken that time to create those spaces, them safe spaces, to allow people to talk and to communicate and to learn from each other. I think that's vastly important.
Yeah, I agree, mate, and I appreciate the support there, and I think it's also important to recognize that people are all on their own journey, and if you'd have
Yeah,
told me to do that prior to kind of being in an environment where that was possible, then I'm incredibly privileged to have the support network I have. I'm privileged in my characteristic base in general. I have been granted more safety in a lot of forums to be able to do that than others have, and I think that's an important factor to remember, I suppose, for myself to say, other people can do that. Well, other people don't feel inherently safe to do that. And that can be to do with a lot of things. It can be to
yeah,
do with characteristics, history. It can be also to do with um, perception and projection and all of those things and everything in between. And I think for me, it's just really important to talking about it doesn't solve the issue, right? Unless
yeah,
it's talking therapy, and then it might do. But for most people, it doesn't solve the issue. What it does is in the darkest moments, either up or down, that people have, and especially if I talk about my own experience with GAD and intrusive thoughts and depression, is like in the hardest moments with each of those, it's really, really difficult to imagine that anybody else has been through that.
mm,
And that is like the hardest thing to compartmentalize. You cannot fathom that anybody else has gone through something like that, because how could they have? And this is where people go down really sharp trajectories downwards, where they then start thinking that they are alone in that. And they also start thinking that there's something wrong with them in that. And that is a real quick step between suffering from maybe an anxious moment or dealing with your anxiety or depression and really serious self-loathing or that kind of downward spiral that we know obviously the acute examples of. Um,
mm,
and I think for me, that's a really important like catch point where people can go, you know what, actually I do feel like that. And isn't that really interesting that we feel like that? And actually, because what's really hard is often people akin it to being like, oh, you're in a band and you're on a pedestal, isn't that fantastic? You're role modeling that. Well,
mm,
actually, I've spent a lot of my career kind of trying to dismantle the pedestal and trying to stop the pedestal being a thing. And
yeah,
so in turn, you've got to do this little dance really where you are role modeling it, and you can talk about actually, look at what I've done and can achieve, but still suffer. Um, and but that's a real fine line for some people, because for some people that isn't going to be like, that will actually be worse, because they'll go, well, geez, like he's got it all together and he's suffering and I'm at this point. Do you know what I mean? And so it's really important that to, on a granular level, really start to talk about this to human basis. Talk about the science that's going on, because I like that. I like thinking about the science. I like thinking about the chemicals. I like thinking about, it's really weird. I came up with a thing the other day, and it was talking about insignificance. And it was like a really weird thing, because for some people this is petrifying, right? And for anybody listening to this that is triggered by this, like, please just take it as my own kind of thought process in this. It's not the right or wrong way to think. It's just a way of thinking. In that, I like to imagine in my mindfulness, and mindfulness was a big changing point for me of really understanding that, not just meditation, because for some people, most people that say they don't like meditation haven't tried the loads of meditation. But will say, for those that don't get on with it, mindfulness is much deeper and bigger, and can be much broader, or can be really acute. And so when I started really understanding what it meant for me to be mindful, I really then started going into insignificance and being like, I have all of these problems on my shoulder, and I've got all of these thoughts that go round in my head, and I real worry about it, and I struggle with it, and it hurts. And then when I go for a walk with my dog, and it's a bit rainy, and there's a lot of sensory kind of things going on, I kind of think about stuff, and I look at, like, it sounds really like trying to be like overtly ethereal with a concept, but I'll look and I'll see nature, and I'll see like a pond with a duck on it or some fish in it, and I think about like my level of insignificance in this world, and I kind of think about in the blip and the dot that we are in time, in the blip and dot we are in this world. Isn't it a miracle that all of these cells and carbon and water have all come together to even be able to think about these crazy thoughts that are going around in my head? And I think, and in that, it kind of gives me solace that actually this is much bigger. And some people call that spirituality, and some people would actually go in to say that's what drives them towards things like religion and stuff. And I think much more for me, it's about that understanding that this is all we've got, like, and this time is all we have. And actually, yes, I might in the wider, bigger scheme of things be insignificant, but like in regards to, the bigger picture, but actually right now, what can I control? And how can I influence? And how can I use every single connection I have to obviously be less insignificant and try and support people in their work, and then equally find myself more. So it's a weird one, because again, for some people, insignificance is a real, especially if you're really low, that's something you really, it's really difficult to kind of deal with that level. But actually for me, it really helped, because when I'm up, it felt like I was like, okay, Dan, like really, if we put it all down on paper for what you need to worry about, what you can influence, what you can control, there's a lot more that are outside of scope than there is right here. And the world's spinning, and it will continue spinning. And, and there'll be tragic things that happen, and there'll be positive things that happen. And what can I control? And what I can control right now is connecting with the earth, and connecting with, sounds very holistic, but it is. But that's mindfulness, right? And mindfulness is here now, sensory experience. And when that rain hits you on the cheek, or you look at your dog doing something silly, or you see your kids running around, or you see the duck, grab the fish, or whatever it is, not that they do, whatever it is, it's like, that's the moment to look at that and think about that, or feel that, or hear that, or taste that, or whatever it is, because that's right now. And that can't be argued with, really. Right now can't be argued with. Your perception of a raindrop hitting your cheek, there's not really much to worry about there. That actually it's just about experiencing it, That's just how I've worked out mindfulness in my own mind.
Yeah. And I mean, for starters, that's an incredible process. And I think a lot of people will, and myself included, can kind of, put ourselves in that, for me, the pandemic was like a big kind of reset and a massive focus to be able to focus more on stuff like that because, we were all locked in, right? And although a lot of people prior to the pandemic and with their own experiences feel kind of locked in anyway within their own thoughts, as you spoke about so eloquently, that when you go down that path, you think you're the only one that's feeling these things, right? And I remember I had moments, I mean, all of us will have had different experiences within that time. But for me personally, something very similar to what you were describing, I was sitting on my balcony in my apartment where I used to live during one of the days of the pandemic. And I remember it was like this beautiful, because it was really hot, right, in the UK during that pandemic summer. Wow. And I remember sitting on the balcony and just watching the birds come and land on the river that I had a view of. And they were just swimming. And I watched the wind blow through the trees. And I sat there for about 20 minutes, not saying a single word, but just watching this kind of theater of the real world happen around me. And it struck me in that moment where I was like, all of these things are happening every single day, and I'm not even noticing them, like, and it is that it kind of, you spoke earlier about having a helicopter view of yourself, and it is kind of like taking yourself out of that for a second and just seeing what's happening around you. And it does kind of
True.
reset a lot of things in your mind and kind of, I don't want to say give perspective, but it just makes you aware of like, the otherworldly things that are happening around you. And I think that's incredible. I
True.
think that's a process that a lot of people sometimes tap into and don't even realize. But when they do and they kind of have that mindfulness and are conscious of that mindfulness, can be a really big help with that mental process.
Yeah, I mean, lots of people will say to me, I don't know about mindfulness. And then it's just about taking it back to what do they do that kind of resets that present like
Mm,
part. And I guarantee 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, people do. They do this
yeah.
every day without even knowing. And the practice is about being able to do it, to stop or to redirect or to kind of move your focus away from potentially the things that are creating a downward spiral. And I think,
Mm.
and as you made, my wife always says, she says it loads, which is awesome about our dog. And she doesn't know what's going on, does she? She doesn't have a clue what's going on. She just lives her life. All she worries about is getting fed and loved and all of that kind of things. And it is, and whilst we are slightly elevated, sometimes not elevated beings, I think there is something in that, is that if we think about society and we think about what innate pressures we've caused ourselves, it can send you completely west, but equally it can also redefine and say that this stuff is caused, and so this stuff can be fixed. And I think that's part of that reset process of what, again, influence and control is such an important thing for people to think about. But again, it's easy for me to say, like, oh yeah, do all of these things, isn't it incredible? Like, this is an ongoing journey. And I think another important advice for people is to realize, like, you might have to deal with this for the rest of your life. And it's not to say that it will be this bad for the rest of your life or this hard to deal with, but actually understanding that you might have tendencies that you might flip into slightly more anxious or slightly lower or more lower is part of the management process of that. And really not judging yourself for, you might be up for a long time and you might be okay for a long time, and then suddenly certain external factors or situations or whatever start pushing you back into where you feel you were worse off. And I think it's really important for people not to judge themselves too harshly when it comes to that stuff, because this is this is chemicals, this is human nature, this is situations. And a lot of the stuff we had to deal with, you made reference to the pandemic. I would say most people went through a moment, whether it's poor mental health or not, whether they defined it as that or not, where they really were asking themselves big questions. What do I believe in? What am I doing in life? Am I safe? What does the future hold for me? Do I align with my friends and family's beliefs and views? Those questions are lifelong style questions. They are humongous questions. What do I value? What is my purpose in life? I mean, they are like the biggest questions. And a lot of people sail through their entire life without ever really sitting down and thinking about what that means, because it's such a big, broad question. And we were all asking it. We were like, oh, let's try and solve it in 6 weeks. Let's try and solve it in a year. Let's try and solve it in now, the 2-3 years that we went through. And but people are trying to ask that of themselves every day because of the changing and how we deal with change as human beings. And so it was just one of those things that I think people really had to either learn on the fly, and there was a lot of different subsets of people, those people that have had mental health related issues or diagnoses that were impacted and compounded by the
Mm.
pandemic. People that had never dealt with that stuff, that I've met, there's loads of people that I met that were like, I've never worried about stuff like this. I've never had this moment. That the pandemic is absolutely, and they're almost like they're like secondary casualties of the pandemic. They're not directly influenced because of the virus, but they are impacted because they now have to deal with something that they never had to deal with before. And then you had others that kind of had this acute episode of worry, and then they've kind of been able to regulate and dissipate. So it's really interesting. I do think globally, it'd be a real shame if we didn't capitalize on the tragedy of that in some way, and push ourselves forward to go, do you remember we were asking ourselves those questions? How do we answer those questions now? What support do we need to answer those questions? I think it would be a shame if we didn't learn from the pandemic, for sure.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's huge scope to learn, because I mean that was a big movement in basically every single person's life in some way. And I think those big kind of, people say like the existential questions, but they're important because sometimes the answers to those questions change depending on where we are
Yeah,
in life and what we're doing in life. But the important thing is to keep asking yourself that, I think, to kind of revisit that and revisit a lot of things, because as I say, like we had that kind of time during the pandemic of when we could really visit these questions and really kind of sit within them. But that experience is so important, and that's something which shouldn't go. We should, if we can, as you said, revisit those questions. I think what's really interesting as well about a lot of what you said there, it's kind of like, you're finding the balance of, you said that, you're in a position where you're able to do a lot of these things and speak to a lot of people. And it is finding that balance, I guess, between not preaching, but just sharing experience and just trying to say to people, look, like almost like leveling with people and just saying, like, I'm not the end result to say I did this and then, everything's fantastic. It's like, I'm still very much a work in process and I'm trying things. I can only share my experience with you to kind of talk through what's kind of benefited me, or like what's helped me to get to this point, or what's helped me to do that. And, and I think that's all we can do, share those
brilliant.
experiences and tell those stories and talk to people. And as you said earlier, it's about just having those conversations and not just putting that post out there, but doing that work, man. I think that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I think, I'm going through it recently. I've had more. There's lots of stuff that's going on personally and professionally that makes it harder. And I think for people need to realize that this isn't also linear in time. So it's not like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have a couple of weeks of this and then I'll be up. Like this can happen over a day. This can happen over an hour. And it because life happens like that. And the situations that you're presented, there's thoughts that creep in. And I know when I'm worse because I'll let those thoughts ruminate. And then I'll be like, okay, well, now I'm in a place, whether that's because I'm tired, whether that's because of the situation I'm in. I think, the only way we can operate is being able to be vulnerable and say, you know what, right now is not me as well as I can be. And it's a real scary place to be vulnerable for a lot of reasons, especially professionally. It's incredibly scary to be vulnerable and open, because what about when you need that support? And what about when that doesn't come? And that sucks. And it is bad and it's hard. And what that does is create scars for you. But when the next time you're willing to be open and vulnerable, it won't be as easy for you to be able to do that. And I think that's a really important salient lesson for everyone to learn in business, and CEOs and executives and everyone in that kind of senior upper echelon, that decision makers, is that when we talk about health and well-being, we talk about inclusion, are we just talking about it? And what do we mean? So when we're asking the people to bring them whole selves to work, and we're talking about them to discuss their own mental health, are we ready for the answer? Because if we're not ready for the answer, don't ask the question. And if we haven't got space and time and infrastructure and policies and procedures that are reflective of the answer, do not ask the question. Because what you're going to do is disenfranchise a whole load of people. And it's the same in life. If we're asking people, are you all right? And then they give us an answer that is longer than we expected, or we're not ready for that answer, it can be more detrimental. So get yourself and so that goes two ways. Get yourself to a place where don't feel that you have to answer everybody's problem, because we don't know what everyone's going through. We might have similar paths, we might have linked over lived experience, but everyone's path is different. and everyone has to walk it in their own way. And I think so that's one thing I'd say to people about boundaries and barriers is really important, because again, when it comes to mental health, it's really easy to have almost like this ritualistic descent together. Because it's like, and you've got to know when actually right now I'm probably not going to be able to give you the best advice. Here are the places that will be able to give you that non-judgmental or clinical advice. And this is a problem. Lived experience does not replace the need for clinical judgment. It just should be weaved into what we do when we create clinical judgment and clinical pathways. It should be all weaved in as a perfect bow, but it cannot replace that. So my advice that I give online is, have you been to a healthcare professional? If it is needed, and it's that kind of stuff I think people get a bit lost in, and you'll go on the internet and be like, oh, I've found I can do affirmations and I'm going to solve all my issues. And it's like, for some people that works, but for other people, and this is the thing, I really struggle with some people online that will be like, do this, 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 and this, solve your mental health issues. And it's nonsense. So you've got to pick and choose the things. And again, it's like a journey, as you said, kind of go through, try and test it. I tried some certain meditation, didn't work for me, tried a different type, did work for me. I've been on medication, I've been off medication, I've been back on medication. It is what it is. It's an ongoing journey. And I'd be lying if I said I hadn't had moments where I forgot all of that stuff and became really anxious or really low, even in the last few weeks. Yeah. So it's just perspective, it's just a lens kind of thing.
Absolutely. No, you're totally right. And it is like, that word journey is so important. It is kind of in some like situations, it's an overused word, and I completely get that. But I think here it's so important to remember that, because you are, as you say, it's a journey through this of trying things of what can benefit you and might help you in the moment, but might be something that you don't revisit because it might not help you for that specific time. But being aware of those things that are able to help you and you can try is so important. And you're right, like online culture as well. We see this all the time where we get minute videos popping up saying, hey guys, this is the top 5 things you need to do now. And it's like, it's almost the reverse of everything that you're talking about, right? Like it's almost like it's like when the brakes slam on that journey that you're on, because this distraction's popped up saying, oh, I just need to try these 5 things I'm being preached at here by this person who I don't know, don't know any experience that they've been through, and like it can be really degrading in some ways. And yeah, it's just, we're in that world now, that online culture, where you have to find that balance of what is beneficial, having conversations like this, where you're talking to somebody, like, being real with each other like this in a way, as opposed to just that almost clickbaity stuff where it just pops up and fires stuff at you. It is finding the legitimate information and the right things that can help you, as opposed to just the things that are thrown at you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, never Google your symptoms is the biggest tip from any healthcare professional out there. Never Google your symptoms, because if you ever want a salient reminder, a classic example of how crazy the internet is when it comes to like information and fact versus not. And I think for me, like, if it works for you, so again, I would say it sounds really in partisan. It sounds like really in the middle. Like, if it works for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like it is what it is. You've got to find your own kind of world. And I think, I reminded a lot of people of this when I did the online safe space. Obviously, I did the physical safe space, and I moved it online over COVID to really have this online community and conversation. And like, I said to people, like, why don't you set up your own? I'm not important in that. Like, yes, I'm doing it, but so, and back to that purpose, back to what you can do. Like, and I had loads of people that came forward saying, oh, I set up a safe space group at my work, and I might be a chef, and I did it with all of the, the other kitchen staff, or with my work colleagues, or I work in the industrial industry where we don't tend to do this, and now I've set it up, or, and it's things like that where, like, just because someone's had a good idea, don't think that isn't an idea that you can't do. And it's not to say you'll copy them, because if they're really truly for it, they don't care if you copy. I don't care if somebody calls it safe space and they do 52 of them, they interview the same people that I interviewed. It makes no difference, because if you're doing it for nefarious reasons and you're doing it for clout and credit, well, then you're going to have a problem with it. If you're doing it and you're making money off it, number one. But if you are doing it because you believe that that's the right thing to do, And it's not martyrdom. It's not to get a round of applause and say, isn't that fantastic? But it is the truth. Like, people do profiteer off this stuff, and
Hmm.
they do gain money off this stuff, and they do virtue signal. And what this is about is going, what is the purpose of what you're trying to do? Is the purpose to raise awareness? Is the purpose to connect the dots? But if it is, then it doesn't matter if it's replicated 1,000 times over. Actually, I would much prefer that all of those people that came and watched the safe spaces all go and set up their own safe spaces. Wouldn't that be great?
Mm.
And it's like, it's that kind of thing. I think people don't underestimate the power that they have. They believe that someone in a position of privilege, and I don't mean that from a kind of societal or protected characteristics way, but more so of like a band or a politician or a, whatever position of authority. They don't realize, actually, if we turn the lens back on ourselves, how much influence could we have, and how much could we change things? And it might be just a change in language, it might be a change in approach, it might be connecting with a couple of people, it might be changing practices at work, it might be changing, opening a conversation up with family. And you say this a lot in the equality, diversity, and inclusion space, like, because this is what stops a lot of people being allies and true active allies, is that they feel either apathetic or insignificant in the fight, or they feel like, this is such a big topic, how could I ever make a difference? And that's again where this apathetic approach comes from. Mental health is exactly the same as standing for BLM or standing for LGBTQI+. Like, it's the same stuff. It is that people feel it's such a big, scary topic. Oh my God, I'm going to do something wrong. Or, oh my God, how can I tackle this mountain that's in front of me? Well, how you can tackle it is by making small, meaningful steps towards a better future. And then again, your influence and your control is so large. You'll never know what opening up a conversation for someone will
Mm.
do, how they then go away. And how it's this ripple effect, right? You can create a tidal wave of movement if you just drop a little like pebble. And it's that kind of stuff. Like, and people, as I said, I'm just graceful optimist in the world. There is a lot of evil in this world, but there's also a lot of good. And I think a lot of people sit in this weird good, bad, good, evil. They sit in this weird spectrum where they just go, they tilt like this a lot. And
Mm.
actually recognizing that small influence is also doing some good in this world, and it is changing the dial. But be
Mm.
active, don't be passive. It's not good enough to just say I'm not. It's better to say I am doing. And
Mm.
that's it. Again, and for EDI, we could talk for hours about it, is that EDI is a journey. Nobody
Mm.
isn't biased. Unfortunately,
Mm.
everybody has been discriminative in their life in
Mm.
one way or the other, subconscious or consciously. And we need to recognize that it's a journey, and it's a journey of learning and development. And if we're all on that journey, then we're all going to make their life a little bit better for the people around us. It's like,
Mm.
again, I could go off on that for forever, I think.
No, I mean, yeah, because you're so passionate by it and that's your experience with that. And I love that, Dan. And, don't ever apologize to me about that because I love it. I'm here for it. And I think just hearing you talk about that so impassioned it's really inspiring again. And it is a lot of ways, it is kind of like, dropping the ego a little bit, and I mean that twofold. One,
Yeah,
and you said about like people with the clickbait and the clout and everything like that. A lot of that can be ego focused, right? Like looking at the statistics, wanting those numbers, baby. That's what they're looking at. And like the reality is that exists in a different world of what we're talking about right now. And a lot of people do live in that space of, as you said, not having that confidence to say, like, oh, well, I couldn't do that. Like how many times do we tell ourselves that through our lives? Oh, I couldn't possibly do that. And it's such a stall on what you could actually do, and it is kind of checking in with yourself and having that conversation of just being like, well, actually, as you said so beautifully there, which is, you just having that one conversation with one person can be that ripple effect to so many amazing things happening. And not even just for you, but for that other person, because you don't know what that other person's experience is and how you could be helping them just by sitting down for 10 minutes with a coffee and just talking. And I think that's so important. And if that inspires something in them to go on and maybe do something similar, you've started something unbeknown to yourself, something like almost like a force of a little bit of positivity in what might be a dark space that you're in at that time. And I think that's
absolutely.
incredibly fascinating and really important. Now, Dan, I need to ask you about Bury Tomorrow. We need to talk about the band,
Yeah,
man. Um, First of all, I just want to say, like, Runes is an album that has a special place in my heart. Like, Man on Fire, The Torch are two songs that will forever be like staples of what I love in metal music. And I hold on very dearly to those songs. I love them. And obviously, played them live as well when I saw you. So yeah, but yeah, I just want to say that album for me is incredibly special. Now, you were talking about earlier how you kind of you separate yourself from the front man that is Dan of the band, obviously from like, NHS Dan, so to speak. And I kind of am similar to that in a little way. I class myself as like, an introverted extrovert in many ways. I have a background in acting and everything like that. So a lot of kind of experience of putting on a different face, when the time calls, and then kind of stepping back into myself. And, we could talk for hours about that as well. But I want to ask about this in particular. Obviously, we're going to talk about the new album, but I want to go back and talk briefly about Cannibal, because that
Sure.
album for me is, the songs on there, like, Imposter, like The Agonist, like Gods and Machines, like a lot of that seems to be connected with the kind of struggles that people have with mental health. And I just want to ask you a little bit about that. That album, I think you even said it's very cathartic for you, and a lot of the kind of writing and what the songs are about there. And do you feel like, that was the album that really allowed you to fully express everything that we've kind of impassionately talked about there within mental health and what really kind of matters to you on that journey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's weird, that album, because it landed in the middle of the pandemic, well, the start of the
Yeah.
pandemic, really.
Mm.
And so for a lot of people, thought I'd weirdly, in some kind of Notre Dame style, Nostradamus kind of style, have predicted this the pandemic, and maybe Bury Tomorrow actually were patient zero. Um, but I think it was a perfectly put album. I think at that point,
Mm.
for a
Yeah.
lot of people, those big questions that I asked, I think people were hearing it in the lyric, and I think it. I have spoken, about my own mental health, or used lyrics in the past, but they're often subjected to quite a lot of metaphors and weaving
Mm-hmm.
in with other storylines and that kind of stuff, rather than being really explicit. I think there's a Manify you made reference to, that absolutely is about mental health.
Mm.
Um, Hannibal was really, it's basically a biography, essentially. And I said that really right from the start. So I'd written 7 songs fully about my own mental health and my own journey. And
Mm-hmm.
then boys, when we were talking about it in the studio, were like, why don't we just do the whole album? Because it seems a bit weird otherwise to do so many songs so blatant. So we did that, and it was really difficult and hard, and like singing it and getting the lyrics all sorted. Like it was a real reflective moment. It was like when, for a lot of people that don't, if you journal and you write things down, that's also a really good and useful tool, not only for kind of
Mm.
mental health, but also just for progression in general in life, growth. Um, and so it was kind of like really public journaling. And
Mm.
because I said it right at the start, like, I'm not, none of the songs, it wasn't like, oh, this song's about anxiety, this song's about depression, this song's about eating disorders. It was like, it was just taking it. When you like take a pen and you just, do you ever do it? You might do it now. When you were younger, like you just let the pen, you literally just let
Yeah.
it go wherever it
Yeah.
wants to. And it's like, and that's like, oh, I think it's called free drawing. And again, it's
Mm-hmm.
another mindful activity, but you just let it go and you write and do, and then you have a look at it, and see what it's telling you. It might say nothing, might say a lot. And that's kind of what I was like with the lyrics. I was like, let's just see where it takes me. And I think it's because I was probably at that time really well, and I'd just done the safe spaces, or I was about to do the safe spaces, sorry, with the band on the
Mm-hmm.
Black Flame tour 2019. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm in this really open space where I feel like I want to do and I want to be, and I want to now not be passive in this. I want to be super active. And I kept looking at my tweets where I'd post a tweet and be like, yeah, we should talk about mental health. Let's do it. Let's talk about it. And I give my thoughts and share my experiences. But it would be like, felt a bit vacuous, to be honest with you. It felt
Mm.
like, okay, Dan, that's great. You're doing a lot of this work in the NHS, but actually your biggest platform, your lyrics, you're not actually being really open and honest. So I was like, all right, let's go. And it took me to some really, really, some of those lyrics they are brutally dark in a lot of
Mm.
places. Better Below being one of the most dark, Infinite being another. And like, I remember sitting with Dad, my brother, the bassist, who we were sat like writing all the meanings to it, because we wanted each, not meanings, but like really summing up what each of the songs was about. And I remember him sitting there and being like, I didn't know you were that bad. Like, I had no idea. And if that doesn't explain to people the importance of articulating and having moments where you can talk and you can express yourself in lots of different mediums, both just talking about what you need, but also talking about how it feels and the differences, then I don't know what else can, because that's my brother who has been in the band since day one. We are as close as it comes when it comes to siblings. Always supported each other, always will support each other. And he was even like, I didn't know it was that bad. Like, and I think that's a really important part, because it was that bad. And it was I was really, it wasn't that I was at the point where I feel like I might not be here anymore, but it was, for the first time in my life, really understood how people could feel like that. It was that close. It was like more weeks of that, a lesser support network, not knowing what I knew just by autopilot of I need to go get help for this, which a lot of people don't feel. They're not going to go to their GP, and they're not going to go to iTalk or their IAP services. They're going to sit and be like, "What? There's nothing here for me." If I'd have been there, we might have been not having this conversation now. And I think, and that's really important, because a lot of that was to do with articulating that and being really open about that and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was, I mean, what I wasn't prepared for was a pandemic. And then loads more people being like, oh my God, this is about me. And I wasn't ready for that. And it was hard. And it has still been hard. It unlocked a different part of our fan base, I think, and gave us probably more people that might not have listened to our band before, but really resonated with Cannibal. Because it was, you know, it's such a successful album for a lot of reasons, not just the songs, but just how it was badged up. And I think for some people, they were like, you know what, this is the reason why I like this band, because they talk about this kind of stuff. And so, but I wasn't ready for that, I don't think, and how that would integrate into my life. And it has done, and I've had to learn on the fly there, really, as we go. Because, you know, you get the messages and you'll get people stop you at the shows and stuff and talk about this stuff. And if you're not ready for that, you know, don't create that space. That can be really, really difficult for people, because that's their opportunity to kind of tell you what it means to them, you know, and that's why I think, you know, people always kind of ask us why we've always met fans. Like, we've always done that. We've never charged for it or done any of that. And we do things like Stage Invasion, all of that. And that is it. Because I've realised how important this is to people. Like, and if you can make a difference in that one moment, and this goes for anything, if you're on public transport and somebody that you feel might be able to take a seat, would be better off with that seat, give them the seat. If you think about, you know, you see some kind of discrimination or poor behaviours or bullying and harassment or whatever, and you can stand for it and you feel safe enough to call it out and call it out. If you feel that actually you see someone and you feel like, actually, I need to give them a little bit more of my time and attention because actually they're looking pretty disconnected with the way, do it. And you said it before, like, you will never know the impact. And there are so many people in this world that will never know that they've saved someone's life. Like, literally, I would say so many people in this world will operate for the rest of their life not knowing that they would have saved people's lives. And if that doesn't tell people how important interactions are, because equally, there's a flip side of that. You know, and people, you know, the guy that assaulted me, no comprehension of what that would have done to me.
Yeah.
No comprehension. He was operating on fight or flight, decided he didn't like the look of me, punched me in the face with an upper duster. You know, he was in his 20s. I was 16, 15. Like, I can't make sense of it, but actually in his head, he was probably just operating in the here and now. He's probably the most mindful person. He's operating in the here and now, you know, and like, he can never understand what damage that did to me beyond the physical. And that's, again, really acute example, but like, it's really important for people to remember that actually every interaction counts. It's not that you have a poor interaction and you can't solve it, but every interaction counts, you know, has a meaning, I think.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And like, it's so lovely to hear that you writing that album and kind of like putting yourself out there and your feelings allowed you to understand that on another level, which you probably weren't aware of, to be fair. Like, you know, as you said, that feedback that you
Oh,
got, and people were
100%.
like, you know, like, people were saying to you, like, this is my album, this speaks to me. How did you write about me, essentially? And that's incredible. And I think that's one thing that people forget so often, is that just by asking that person, or just by taking that time, as we said before, like, just ask that person, how you doing? Like, give them a little bit more of your time because you recognize that they need it. Of course, it's understanding that you're doing something that could potentially be great for them in that moment, but that, like, the reflection of that is what it does to you as well. And I think that's really important, is that you don't understand how better that can, or how that can benefit you in so many ways, and kind of give you that
So,
boost to kind of do that more often. And people, I think, often, I try to do this all the time, where I've worked in the service industry for years. I don't now, but I've got that experience. I know what it's like, man, standing at that counter and people come up, and it's soulless a lot of the time. But when that one person out of that queue would just say, like, "Oh, hey, how you doing? I see your name's Adam. Like, what's going on? Like, how's things? Is your shift been okay?" That little question, that little break from that formula and that normality of just next, 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 meant the absolute world to me. And that's something that I try to do every single time I walk into a store, is just ask that person, "Hey, how's your shift going? How you doing?" And just ask them something different from what they've probably been asked 400 times, right? And it's a little something for me, because, I don't know that person's be. Of course, I have the experience of, like, those encounters working in that environment, but as well, it's just, I know that what that did for me, and hopefully if that can help them in some way, but also it just helps me as well, and knowing that, having that interactions may have benefited somebody, I don't know. So yeah, so I totally get what you're saying there. It's nice to be able to, you know have that conversation with that person, be it brief, be it long, but also to reflect on actually what it does for you and how it helps you. And I think that's definitely what you were kind of talking about with that album there, how it helped you to understand that on a deeper level.
yeah, definitely. And it's one of your steps to well-being is giving. And I think a lot of people get that twisted in
Mm,
that, there's a lot of science behind steps to well-being. And one of those steps being giving is actually not just giving money or giving to charity or giving kind of gifts in kind. Like, this is also about giving your time and your space and your energy to something. And that's a really important, as you said, it's a reciprocal thing. Like,
mm-hmm.
and my brother does exactly what you mentioned. So he did a bit of a social experiment when we were on tour
Mm,
once, and when we go to like Starbucks or a coffee shop or something, he would purposefully wait, and he would pick the person that looked the most either angry or upset, and he would ask them. He basically, and bear in mind, my brother has a psychology degree. He doesn't use it often, but he has one, and he was like, it's really interesting to see that reactionary switch when you
mm,
do show genuine interest in somebody, and it's the genuine kindness of strangers. And I think that's really important. I would say, when you think about like the American culture, for example, American
yes.
Canadian culture, the Americas, like that level of customer care, it's really interesting in the English culture, because you'd sit there and you'd be like, oh, it's fake, it's all of this. And actually, when you go out to the States and you experience it, which I've been lucky enough to do many times, I've taught there now 4 times, will be 5 times in the next coming weeks. And like,
Oh wow.
for me, it's like, it, it's amazing. Yes, there's some fakeness behind there, whatever, but actually in a lot of cases, this is because people are genuinely interested. And I would say, states get so much flack for a lot of things. Their stigma reduction when it comes to people talking about going to therapy or being on medication
Mm,
or having, they talk about having a shrink or whatever. And this is in ingrained in people right from an early age, that actually it's all right to say, I go to therapy. Like, how many times in the UK do you think people would go into a workplace and talk about being in therapy? I'm telling you now, even in a mental health setting, they would not talk about that.
yeah.
I'd say probably one or two people that I know would be like, yeah, I go to therapy, because people see it as less than, people see it as a
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
Whereas out there, it's seen as growth and self-progression, almost like a life coach,
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to a coach. And it's a really interesting one, because I think we've got a long, long way to go when it comes to destigmatizing. I think we're doing well. I think we are on the right track, but I think we have a long way to go, especially in this country, when it comes to destigmatizing, like people being able to walk into a workplace and be like, because I talk about anxiety and depression because it's all I know, and obviously eating disorders, but what about psychosis?
Yeah.
What about real traumatic crisis? What about PTSD? What about schizophrenia? What about
Mm,
actually, and we've had this steep learning curve when it comes to neurodiversity and the needs of people who are neurodiverse within a workplace, but also society in general. And actually, if we're having steep learning curves on full on science-based behavioral differences and behavioral needs, then there are far more that we don't know about in regards to support
Mm.
needs and how to deal with and support people. And it's really interesting to see kind of neurodivergence emerge almost, even, and how many people are being diagnosed later on in life now because this emergence of awareness. And people have been campaigning for this for years, and like eons of time, saying like, I need more support, I need more help. And if it doesn't again prove that we've got a long way to go when it comes to
Mm.
thinking about this stuff again, because the thing with kindness and the thing with space and time to think about this stuff and interactions and impact, you can scale it up and you can scale it down. You can
Yeah.
scale it right down to a micro moment of us having a conversation right now, or you can
Mm.
scale it right up to society, its ethos. In an organization, it might be your vision, your values, your culture, like the direction, your operational drive. Like, it can be all of those things, and then all the way down to a micro moment. And it's really important that we remember that scaling things up to remember how do we support people and create space for people to feel psychologically safe. That's a big deal, and it's a big question to ask. So again, I think if everyone is operating in that mindset, we'll be in a much better place. And we
Mm.
won't be as shocked. Someone
Yeah.
comes up and says, I am um, neurodivergent and this is what my needs are. You're not going to go, oh, or actually I do suffer from psychosis. You're not going to go, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with that. Or you might
Mm.
do, but you'll actually know the right places to support people to go to.
Yeah, you're so right. Like the American culture has normalized it in many ways, and definitely for the better, where the conversations definitely happen a lot more kind of often and fluently within American culture. My partner's like obviously lives in America, and I get a lot of that conversation. I'm around that space quite often. So when you mentioned it, completely understand where you're coming
Is
from.
it?
And it is kind of like that reserved culture that we have of stereotypical Brits, where you have much more of a reserved culture. Oh, you don't talk about that, stereotypes of stiff upper lip, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, like when you go there, it's so much more expressive about things like this. And hopefully that's something which we can take guys from and make that much more of the normal. To discuss that, as you said, like you ask people now, like, oh, like, you go into a room and ask people who's like, going through or has had therapy or is going to therapy, very rarely would anyone even want to talk about it. It's like that taboo subject, and we don't discuss that,
Really?
and it's wild. It's a difference in culture. Um, but I do want to ask you about the latest album, Dan. So the Seventh Son. Now,
Mm.
this album, and obviously I want to kind of talk about the writing process briefly with you, kind of from the last album to this one, but man, it packs a punch. And in the
Well, yeah.
best ways, like it lands. And like, when you guys dropped like, Life Paradise Denied, like it like blew me off my seat. I was like, right, we are here, let's go. And I love it. Like the structure of the album is so interesting. It's like, and you've spoken about this yourself, and obviously the band have as well. It's like this new direction, right? And you talk about the
Well,
significance of the number seven as well and what that means. And you know, it's this new, kind of journey, I guess that's the word again, for the band. And that's really fascinating to me. I love that when bands have this moment of when they kind of, and don't let me speak for you, but it kind of in general, from what I've read before, of like bands when they get to a certain point on their journey, and it's almost like they just pivot and start in a new direction. Always find that really fascinating when that lands and what gets them to that point. And yeah, just basically, I just wanted to ask about the new album. Like, what do you think kind of brought you to, right, this is the album that we really want to kind of try something new, try something different, and how kind of
well.
your writing process has then, the influences that you talk so beautifully about has then kind of brought you to this album.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of forced, I suppose, into the first part of it, I think, because, we had the pandemic
Yeah.
and then everyone realizes we had a lineup change,
Yeah.
which Jace left the band and which kind of put us in a different world, in a different world of like, is this band actually going to be a thing anymore? Not just, is this band going to continue in a new direction? This was a
Mm-hmm.
big kind of question. And there's lots and lots of reasons as to that. The culture in our band around the time of, even recording Cannibal was poor, like really, really bad. And for me, even though it's a cathartic process doing Cannibal, for a lot of members of this band, it was a really laboured and poor experience for a long, long time. And I think, the pandemic creates space. And so some people say, oh, is the pandemic the reason why that happened? I don't think so at all. I think actually, it's a benefit to us because it creates space away from each other where we could really address actually what we want from this life. And so we're in a place where that happened, which obviously forced us into whatever that might be. Lots and lots of people would say that's it, that's the end of the band, because he was such a big part of the band. And then we had like shows ready to go. So we were again kind of forced into, what do we do here then? Do we actually play these shows and then see our time out? Or do we play these shows and become more? And immediately we knew we wanted to do it in a different way. And mainly, yes, the 7 is significant. Yes, our 7 members are significantly different. But actually, what we wanted to do is make sure that the culture, the ethos behind our band matched it. So it was like, we treat people with respect, and we treat each other with respect, and we are kind and considerate, and there's no drama in our band. And that was a real conscious, like, if we're doing this because we want to have fun and we want to enjoy our time in this band, and we don't want to put pressures on each other. And so, we decided, and Tom is one of Dawson's oldest friends. We knew Ed from Bournemouth, who used to play in a band called Heart and Hand. We toured together before, and we knew Ed very well. And a lot of Ed's friends from where he lives in Bournemouth are really good. I grew up with. I went to college with a lot of his really good friends, and so that was like a beautiful kind of tie. And so I knew Ed was a good guy, and we knew, and Tom was obviously really known by Dawson as being a great dude. And that was the most important thing right at the start, which sounds really like okay, guys, it was just all about the culture, but it was, and that was really important. And then when we kind of started working, we realized how talented both of them were. And like, Tom is unbelievably talented. Ed is absolutely gifted and one of the coolest human beings on the planet. But Tom is unbelievably gifted. The guy plays all the instruments in our band. He produces. He's a songwriter in his own right. Got a really good voice. Can scream as well. Like, it was just like, what have we got here? How has this happened? We've not just gained a singer, we've gained somebody that is an unbelievable driving force between now and the new direction of our band. And so we kind of surrendered ourselves to that really at the start, of not going, let's shoehorn him and Ed into the band. Let's allow this to flourish. And we kind of said with Death and Life, like, if this is it, like, we knew we were going to record the album anyway, but with those 2 singles, we were like, if this is it, let's just try everything. Let's just have a go. And for some people, it doesn't sound like, they'll say, oh, it's not that different. It's not, say, like when, say, bands like Bring Me or Architects have really tried to push the genre out. It's not in those worlds, I don't think, necessarily. But it's definitely not a traditional Bury Tomorrow album.
Yeah.
And because we were getting, honestly, I don't see us have done an 8th album if we'd have continued churning out the same stuff. And whilst I know people were really enjoying it, and I know that we were getting better, Cannibal is a better album, Black Flame, for me, but I know for other people they would disagree. But it felt very formulaic. It felt like, oh, we go through the motions and we write these songs. These are the heavy songs. These are the light songs. This is how it goes. And that's what a lot of people had said to us. Even off Cannibal, they'd say, I love that album, but like, when are we going to change it up a little bit? And so we did. And The Seventh Son is a very interesting album. It's a bit different. It's very visceral and heavy in places. Lyrically, it was very much about this new beginning. It was a call out to those people that had walked away from us for no reason, giving up before they'd even heard a note of a song. It was a bit of a call out in that space. It was a confident album. It's like, this is what we do. And that was great. It was really nice to be able to write that. It was one of the most joyous, it is the most single-handedly the most enjoyable experience I've ever had in the studio. And I've been in a band for 16 years. And so I've recorded over, hundreds of songs.
Yeah.
And this was easily the most enjoyable experience because it was fun and it was a great time. And, we wouldn't, songs like Majesty and songs like Carcass King wouldn't have been a thing. And so a lot of people will say to me, oh, why is it's a real shame that Bury Tomorrow haven't continued in the same way. I say a lot of people, some people say that. And for me, I'm like, it wouldn't have. So you can either have this Bury Tomorrow or you would have no Bury Tomorrow. And that is how serious it got, is that the band wasn't going to be a thing for its 7th album. And that is a categoric fact. So when people get all upset about it, and I can understand why people look in a lot of memories and joy to that, but
Yeah.
keep that joy. We're still the band. We're still four members of a five-member band. And now we're a six. It's like it's really important to like think about what potential we have for more change.
Mhm.
And that's not because we're going commercial, because we're not going to go commercial. But it's thinking about that change now. Actually, what can we do? What can we afford ourselves? So we've paved a bit of a way with Seventh Son, and it was
Mhm.
always going to be that album, which was like, oh, Barry Tomorrow try some new things. No, the new songs that we've already written, and they're already ready to kind of like, we've got a lot of songs ready to go.
Mhm.
Is that's just imagine the progression between now. If you think there's a progression between Black Flame, Cannibal, and Seventh Son, the next one is even more progressive, and that's the right
Mhm.
thing to do. We want to push ourselves.
That's super exciting. No, that's incredible. Nice little tease there, but I'm super pumped to hear that,
Yeah.
man. That's incredible. And you know what? Like you're right. Like just kind of to round off, obviously, the old albums don't go away. That's what's important. Like people think like as soon as you've tried this new journey or they're on this new direction now, I can't listen to them. Well, like that's kind of ridiculous. Like, like those albums still exist. You can go back to them. They don't go. And
And we're still super proud of it, Like I
yeah.
think a lot of bands get a little bit twisted about that. Like Choke is one of our biggest songs ever.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
is one of the most abrasive, heavy, and biggest songs. Black Flame is one of our biggest sing-alongs.
Yeah.
So it's like, why I'm not going to be upset that the song that I wrote is people's favorite album. What I
Yeah.
get upset about is when people just don't give it a chance. And that, again, you can't force people to do it, but
No.
it's an interesting one.
But just to say as well, my favorite song on the album is Begin Again. I think that song for
Really?
me encapsulates so much of what you've just talked about, basically. But I just think it's a beautiful song. And like, I mean, man, I mean, obviously, Dan, I could talk all about your vocal because like that harsh vocal you have just resonates for me on a particular level that I adore. But like what I
Like,
love is like you're welcome. But what I love is how in that song in particular, your vocal with that clean vocal, man. I mean, that's just music to my ears. And I think that for me, that's an example of within an album that takes a very different direction. For me, that particular song is saying so much just about who you guys are, about the album. For me, it resonates with me so much. And honestly, that song landed with me. It's like it's been on repeat for me. Like, when like you hear that, you find that new song that's just on repeat for you, and it's like instant favorite. That for me was Begin Again. It's just stunning. Absolutely beautiful,
thank you
man.
very much. Yeah, it's a that song as well has carved the way for some of our new songs as well. Like,
Mm.
it live, I sing on that song as well. So I'll sing
Yeah.
parts of the chorus on top,
Nice.
which is obviously something that is very new for me to express. It's not something that's new, but it's something that's new that I've done. And that will pave the way absolutely for future stuff in that way. Whilst again, we are always going to be a brutally heavy band. That's just the stuff that we enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work of being able, especially vocally for me. Like I've been on a massive journey vocally. If you listen
Mm.
to Portraits to Now, like I'm always kind of trying to be better and better and better and learn my own craft and always worry about that and try and really push that. And I think Seventh Son is the best articulation of my voice because I brought back stuff that I used to do when I was younger, like the really highs, the lows, the tonal vocals, the shock moments.
Mm.
Abandon Eyes blew people's faces off when I did the "How could you do that to us?" bit. It shocked people into a moment.
Yeah.
And that's really cool because I've always wanted to do that. And I think a lot of that stuff probably again would have been wheedled out as a bit cringy or not something that we should do. And actually, why not? Like, why?
Mm.
Life's too short. Like, and especially life's too short being in a band and we've got an innate amount of privilege that we've got a lot of people that really like us and actually would be
Mm.
supportive of us trying new things. And so why would we not use that opportunity wisely? And I think
Absolutely.
Begin Again, one of those. It's not surprising that you like Begin Again if Torch is one of your favorite songs as well, because they
Yeah.
are very, very similar in their nature. It's that hard but melodic as well. So yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
No, honestly, man, just being honest with you while I've got the opportunity to. But yeah, Dan, honestly, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and chat with me to do this. It's something that I've been looking forward to for a long time. And it's so nice to hear you talk so eloquently about why you're so passionate about what you do, both with the band and obviously with the work with the NHS as well. Honestly, it's really inspiring, and I'm sure a lot of people will take a lot from this. So again, honestly, thank you for that, man. It's been
No,
incredible,
thank
and I
you.
just just want to say as well, you've got the tour coming up, right? You're going to Australia like later on this year. Like that's epic.
Yeah, yeah. So doing the States in the start of September for a week. We're also doing Blue Ridge Festival, which is obviously one of their biggest festivals. Which basically every band that everybody likes is on
Yeah.
that festival, pretty much. And then we've got While She Sleeps at the end of the year, at the
Ah,
end of September here. So Ali
yes.
Pali, and then that's a few shows in Europe, which again is looking really good because it's actually now us. We can say that it's While She Sleeps, us and Polaris, which
Yeah.
given what that
Oh,
band have gone through recently, it's great that they've found that resolve to be able to come and still do that because I
yeah.
think a lot of people will want to be showing them a lot of love, considering what they're going through at the moment in time, and so I think that's going to be quite an emotional moment, I suppose, for that band. I would expect it to be anyway, and then we've got yeah, Australia, as you said, it's like one of the first proper headliners we've done. We did some small headliners back when we toured with 2016 or 2015, but this is our first proper, and they're going to sell out and like a 900, 1,000 cap, that kind of stuff. So that's really cool for us.
Mm.
And then yeah, then we've got the end of the year off. I think we're going to do some recording, get into the studio again, and people can expect a UK tour announcement, the UK Europe tour announcement for the start of next year, which is going to be
Oof.
really cool. It's a big one as well, so it's going to be lots of fun. It's already all confirmed. We've just got to wait until While She Sleeps shows, and then we can announce that for people.
Nice. Well, you might see a familiar face at some of them shows, that's all I'm saying. But honestly,
Yeah, of
Dan, no,
course.
thank you so, so much for this. Where can everyone find, the band and can find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I'm on pretty much all social media other than the ones that I'm too old to probably know about. But yeah, Dan Berry tomorrow on all of the usual sites. So TikTok, Instagram, now real what is it called now? Threads, yeah, on that as well.
Threads. Yeah.
Yeah, so people can find me on all of that stuff as Dan Berry Tomorrow. People can also find the band on all of those things as at Berry Tomorrow. So yeah, please do reach out. But yeah, thank you for this. I appreciate it.
All right, and there we go, guys. So again, thank you so much, Dan. This has been an absolute joy. And until next time, everyone, take care.